Tonight we're in Swindon, and welcome to Question Time. And as ever, welcome to you at home watching, welcome to our audience here who are going to be putting the questions, of course, and to our panel who don't know those questions till they hear them. The Conservative Defence Secretary, Philip Hammond, Labour's Shadow Health Minister, Liz Kendall, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy, the philosopher and writer, Roger Scruton, and the author of many novels since her first triumph with Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, Jeanette Winterson. Excellent. And Sandra Selden has our first question. Sandra.
Do Ian Duncan Smith's welfare reforms represent a moral mission?
Do Ian Duncan Smith's welfare reforms represent a moral mission? This is in the light of the Archbishop Nichols of the Roman Catholic Church saying they were a disgrace. The Church of England today is saying there was a moral imperative to act. And the Prime Minister rebutting all this, saying they are, the Tories, on a social and moral mission. Charles Kennedy.
Well, first things first, I have been a critic of some of these welfare reforms that the coalition's brought forward. I've spoken against some and voted against some in the House of Commons, so I'm not perhaps the best proponent of the argument. But going to the nub of the question, which is about the moral dimension involved here, I think it's very appropriate that clergy speak out on these issues, social issues, which have a moral dimension. I think they've got every right to. They've done so under successive governments. It's a mark of a small L liberal democracy that they should do so whatever party or combination of parties is in power. Secondly, and I think if you look at the letter today that was published in the Daily Mirror from a variety of church leaders, I listened to an interview this afternoon in my lengthy travel getting here today with the Bishop of Manchester. And he was making the point that quite a lot of the government's aims they were not disagreeing with, but they were pointing out gross deficiencies in the welfare system. Leave aside the specific changes the government's making. Like me, you can be critical of aspects of those, you can be against them and so on. But the actual endemic problems within the benefit system of people changing from one category to another, getting wrongly assessed, encountering great delays, ending up having to go to food banks, even if they were in employment because there were gaps in their benefit payments or the sustainability of their income and so on. These were all things that needed to be looked at as well.
Do you agree with what they said, that 500,000 people in this country regularly go hungry?
Well, I'm not in a position to criticise it or to undermine that argument. I mean, I think that you only need to listen to what nutritionists in the clinical profession are saying, both about two very contradictory things, one being the prevalence of obesity in our society, but at the other end, too many children in particular going to school not properly nourished.
Roger Scruton.
Well, I agree that this is a very complex question which has been wound into politics at a time when everybody's looking for some kind of moral crusade to conduct. I would say that, of course, this is a moral issue. It's a moral issue because people are suffering and people need to be supported if they've come to the stage when they can't support themselves. But it's also a moral issue because a vast number of people feel that the benefit system is being exploited by those who are using it for their own benefit and not taking responsibility for their own lives. That is a moral question too, the extent to which individual citizens ought to be responsible for their own lives. And I think all the reforms, as I understand them, have been brought about because there is widespread discontent with this fact that the benefit system creates a culture of dependence, where people come to it wanting and needing it, of course, because that's the way it has turned out for them, but nevertheless not accepting that it is their responsibility to do something about it.
Sandra, what did you make of what the Archbishop and the bishops of the Church of England said?
Well, my view is that I feel that there is a moral mission in regard to people who are benefit fraudsters, who we all want to see sorted. But unfortunately, they only represent a small percentage of people who desperately need welfare support and might feel a great deal of hardship as a result of these reforms.
So
I agree with the Archbishop.
You agree with the Archbishop? When the Prime Minister says he's on a social and moral mission with the welfare reforms, do you agree with that?
That's what I mean. It is only in a sense that it's targeting a few rather than the majority of people who actually need welfare support.
OK, and the man over there, you, sir.
I think the benefit fraud is a smokescreen which hides the impact of these reforms on people with autism and other disabilities. I spend a lot of my day job hearing from parents and adults with autism and disabilities and hearing about the impact that the assessment of benefits through untrained assessors is actually having on their lives and depriving them of really the basic support that they need to live their life. And that can be washing, shopping, going out, trying to get a job. And I really do think that some of the rhetoric in the media around benefits and benefits fraud is hiding that impact.
Philip Hammond, would you like to answer his point?
Well, let me first of all say I don't think many people would have an issue with the need to clamp down on benefit fraud. But equally, benefit fraud is a relatively limited problem. The moral mission that David Cameron was referring to is a much broader one. It's about getting away from a system that for many, many years, under governments of all colours, has simply dumped people on welfare for the long term, has not helped them to help themselves, has not recognised that the only really sustainable way for people to get out of poverty and stay out of poverty is to help them into work, if they are able to work. And the mission we've set ourselves is to make sure that the welfare system supports those who cannot work, because it's morally right that we should. But for those who can work, we help them with the right incentives, the right skills to get back into work. And it's not just about welfare reform, it's about immigration reform, it's about creating jobs in society so that the jobs are there for people. It's about reforming our education system so that people have the skills that will allow them to earn a pay packet, and that in turn gives them the security and the peace of mind that families need.
Are you made uneasy when you have the head of the Roman Catholic Church saying the welfare reforms are punitive and a disgrace, the Archbishop of Canterbury saying the government policy means that children and families pay the price for high inflation rather than the government? Are you uneasy at the moral issue being, the moral charge being made against you, or the charge of presumably of immorality?
Well, first of all, like Charlie Kennedy, I think it's perfectly acceptable for churchmen to engage in this kind of debate. It's an ethical issue, and they have a right to engage in the debate. I don't very much like the choice of language, and I think when I looked at Archbishop Nichols' article, there were quite a number of things in it which I could agree with. What I don't, of course, accept is the implication that there's an immorality in the motive. We are trying to do what is right. We are trying to help people to be able to help themselves, get them to engage with work, get them to acquire the skills that they will need so that they can do the things that most of us are fortunate enough to be able to take for granted. Hold down a job, support our families, bring home a pay packet every week.
Let's hear one or two. The woman there in the fifth row down. Yes.
I think when the welfare system was first set up, it was supposed to be a safety net for those who had fallen on hard times. I think what we're seeing right here, right now, is not a new problem. This is something that's been growing and building steadily for the last 20, possibly even 30 years, which is why right here, right now, the enormity of the problem is just so big.
Are you sympathetic to what Ian Duncan-Smith and the Prime Minister are trying to do?
I am sympathetic. I think we absolutely need to ensure that we care for the people, the vulnerable people, the disabled people in society, the people who are just not in a position to help themselves for one reason or another. But I think for too long, there are people who have been exploiting the system.
All right. And the man up there, and then I'll come to you, Jeanette. Yes, you, sir. Yes.
A banker, a Daily Mail reader and a single mum on benefits sat down to have a packet of a dozen biscuits. The banker took 11 biscuits and whispered to the Daily Mail reader, "Watch out for her, she's trying to nick your biscuits." It's always been the case, throughout history, it's always been the case that the rich and powerful turn to the people who work and make them turn against the people who can't work. And this is exactly what's happening now.
Jeanette Winterson, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I do. There are all kinds of benefit fraud. I mean, 3 more people have been indicted this week for rigging the LIBOR rate. That is a fraud against the taxpayer. Google, Starbucks and Amazon find perfectly legal loopholes so they don't have to pay the taxes that they should pay. We've just sold Royal Mail at a huge loss to the taxpayer. That money could have gone in welfare benefits, it could have gone to a lot of good causes. Instead, it went to make rich people richer. That's not a good system. Oh, Postman did not. No, they didn't. My postman, I said to my postman, "Are you going to buy any shares?" He said, "I can't afford them and the bank won't lend me any money." People who ran post offices weren't even offered shares. It's just rubbish to say that postmen have suddenly got rich. Postmen have not got rich because of the Royal Mail sell-off.
Everybody who worked for the post office got shares.
Yes, and they didn't get rich. You know where that money went. Anyway...
Where did that money go?
The money went...
Do you know where it went?
It went in... I want to continue. Yeah. Here's the issue, the moral issue is this, that if you read the Bible, I don't see any sign of Jesus advocating tax breaks for the rich. I see him feeding the 5,000. I see him going to the rich man and saying, "Give away everything you've got to the poor if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven." I see him sitting with prostitutes. There are a lot of right-wing so-called Christians who believe somehow that the poor are responsible for all their own problems and nobody needs to do anything.
OK, exactly.
I've got one more thing to say, which is this. That if we create a society where people can have work, dignified work, where they can hold their head up, earn a living wage to support themselves and their families, that's a different thing. You can work 50, 60 hours a week on the minimum wage and not be able to support your family. So all this rhetoric about get out there and get a job, even if you get a job, you are still going to get into debt, you can't afford a house, you can't support your family. David Cameron has never been hungry in his life and he doesn't know anybody who's ever been hungry. He's not fit to be Prime Minister.
OK. Ms Kendall. Do you agree with Jeanette?
I think that having a job and earning a decent wage gives people a sense of dignity from having the self-reliance that they can look after themselves and their families. And I think it is a mark of a moral society that we look after the people who cannot support themselves. The problem is that what the government's doing isn't working. We have a work programme that in many places is worse than having nothing at all, and we're having people who are severely sick and disabled, whose partners or loved ones are looking after them but need to sleep in a separate bedroom, who are having to pay the bedroom tax. And I think people are asking if it isn't really helping people to get work and earn a decent wage, and if the government is also penalising some of the poorest and most vulnerable, they don't think that's fair. And I think it is right that the bishops have spoken up and about that. We want to have a system where people have strong incentives and support to work, but that's not happening, and we need a proper safety net for those who can't, and that's not happening either. And when I see in my own constituency 200 tonnes of food a year going out through food banks, people aren't going to food banks because it's easier than popping to Tesco's or Sainsbury's. It's Liz Kendall, not Rachel Reeves.
Sorry.
I know we all look the same. I think that people are not...
Are you flattered by the comparison or not?
Most flattered, absolutely. I don't think people are going to food banks because it's easier than popping to Tesco's or Sainsbury's. They're going because they're desperate.
All right. Philip Hammond.
And we need to address that.
You've had 2 attacks on government policy.
You say you want to create incentives to work. Can you just remind the audience how many of our welfare reforms the Labour Party has supported? Labour wants to avoid the difficult decisions.
No,
How
we
many
don't.
of them have you supported?
We want...
How many? Have you supported the cap on benefits that stops people on benefits being able to earn more than a family in work?
Have you... We don't. We think the way that you've done it hasn't worked.
Have you supported the cap on housing benefit?
We want a compulsory job scheme where people are offered work but are told that they will lose their benefits if they don't take it.
Well,
actually, you scrapped our Future Jobs Fund, which was far more successful than your work programme.
Your keynote policy, your work guarantee is funded for how long? 1 year. Funded for 1 year. Rachel Reeves has admitted as much.
Your doppelganger.
My doppelganger.
Roger Scruton.
Yes, this is getting too party political. And I think that all such debates would benefit from some comparative judgments. With what country are we comparing ours when we make these great decisions? You know, everywhere that I've read about, including America, France, Germany as well, has had this problem about the welfare system and the claimants of the people who are claiming benefit and how to rectify all the political imbalances and the resentments that come from this. It's not as though we were facing this alone, and the policies that the government are proposing have their parallel elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in the world. So in what way is our country supposed to be doing something morally despicable? Is it perhaps everybody is in this position?
All right, hold on a second. Sorry. Let me bring some more members of the audience and I'll come back to the panel. You, sir, down there in the front.
Yeah, surely one of the major problems that we've got is not how much people get, is how they spend it. And one of the most immoral things that we've ever done in this country is the relaxation of all the gambling laws. So many people who are poor find gambling so attractive.
All right, and you, sir, over here on the right.
Yeah. Can we get back to the question?
Get back to it, yes.
The clergy have commented that the welfare safety net is shredded. Mr Cameron, his policies, he's got every faith in them. Surely the question is one of timing. The policies that Mr Cameron has advocated, and they may work or may not. They're medium and long-term policies.
They're already working.
We're
already seeing people we're already seeing people coming off benefits and going back into work.
The clergy are talking about a situation here and now. The clergy.
All right, I think we get the point. Okay.
Here and now.
Charles Kennedy.
People cannot live on hope, as Mr Cameron has said.
OK. Charles Kennedy.
I couldn't help but smile, actually, the gentleman at the front who mentioned gambling, because there's the old story, and I think it's true, when Harold Macmillan was either Chancellor or Prime Minister, he introduced premium bonds. And the Archbishop of Canterbury of the day condemned him for the institutionalisation of gambling. Macmillan's answer was, well, unlike His Grace the Archbishop, I don't consider it my job to save sinners, just to encourage sinners to save. I think we've got a slightly better quality of exchange between the Prime Minister of the day and the leading clerical figures in the land, and long may that continue. Right. But politicians should tread with infinite care. I appreciate that David Cameron has been pulled onto the moral argument in response to what's been said this week. But I do think Macmillan had a point that morality is better, perhaps, in the pulpit than it is in party politics.
No, that's not right, Charles.
In that
it's
sense.
Not right.
In that sense.
It's not right. You know, do we want to be a moral people or do we not? You don't hide off your morality.
I don't think you want moral lectures from people like the three of us.
It's not about lectures. It's about saying what kind of a people do we want to be. This week, Britain overtook Germany as the main market for Ferrari. Right? More new Ferraris were sold in Britain. Now, we're rich. We can afford to look after our people. I don't think you can hive off the moral argument and say morality is for churchmen, it's not for politicians.
All right. Let me hear from two or three other members here. You, sir, with the spectacles. Then I'll go back up there to the top. Yes.
Yeah, I think with issues like this, people always tend to talk about the benefit fraudsters and then, you know, the poor suffering people that do deserve benefits. But it's the problem in the middle that is the biggest problem, because a lot of the people that are, you know, scrounging off benefits at the moment, within the eyes of the law, are more than deserving for it. But it's because the system doesn't dictate who, properly, who should have it and who shouldn't. And I think that's the biggest problem that we need to tackle.
I think you've raised a really important point, which is that more than 2/3 of people living in poverty now are actually in work. And the problem is that our economy has too long relied on low-skill, low-paid jobs. We haven't taken the long-term decisions we need to invest in skills, technology and our infrastructure. And actually, we need to shift our mindset here. We are never going to succeed in our families or communities or as a country if we try and fight a race to the bottom. And actually, it is that issue of people who are in work but on low pay and aren't able to get the skills and the jobs they need to really build a better life. And we have got to shift our economy.
When you describe it, what are you going to do?
I'll tell you three things.
The description is
Number one,
accepted. What do you do
I think
about
we
it?
need to sort out on the problems of housing. We need to have more social and affordable housing so people can get on the housing ladder. Second, we need to transform skills so that we've got the skills for the future. And thirdly, I'd like to see a new system of regional banks that support different parts of the country so we're not perhaps so dominated by London and the South East. That would make a difference.
Is the people who, within the eyes of the law, are deserving of all these benefits, but morally they're not. And it's costing the system however many billions of pounds per year, when really that money should be going somewhere else. It's not really the fraudsters, in the legal sense of the word, that are the problem, because as Philip touched on, I doubt there's that many of them in comparison.
What do you mean by people who deserve, but it's morally wrong that they take it?
The way the system is dictated at the moment, there are a lot of people that are claiming benefits perfectly legally that, from a moral point of view, to most people's standards at least, shouldn't be deserving of it.
Why?
Because they're not disabled, they don't have any problems with their skills, they could be in work, and they should be in work, but they, for whatever reason, choose not to be.
Oh, I see.
But then isn't that our obligation to create a system where the incentives point people strongly towards work?
Yeah.
I agree with Rachel. There's no future for Britain. I agree with that. There's no future for Britain as a low-wage economy. We need to be a high-skill, high-wage, high-productivity economy. We need to point people towards work. We need to give them the skills to be able to earn so that they can deliver the security that their families need.
So what will you do about the minimum wage that doesn't pay its bills?
Shall I pin this? We've got to move on. I'll take one more point from the man at the very back there, and then.
But I agree with Rachel as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the chap with this packet of biscuits is quite frankly crackers. This is not about bankers. This is about trying to get people into work, and I don't think we should apologise for having a debate about that. Being on benefits is no fun. It's extremely difficult, but it's detrimental to people's long-term physical and mental health as well as their wallets. And so I think the government's efforts to take people out of tax at a very low level are to be welcomed. But this is about getting people into jobs because it's long-term in their best interests.
Right. Well, it's in society's best interest. It's a topic I know we'll come back to in the successive weeks. But if you want to join in the debate, of course, you can. Twitter or hashtag Twitter is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. If you're texting, our number is 83981, and the red button will tell you what other people are saying. And due to that, we follow very closely what's said about us on Twitter, even though we can't see it while we're doing this broadcast. I want to take a question now from Philip Webb, please. Philip Webb.
In view of the recent events, why are we still planning to build on floodplains in Swindon and elsewhere?
And are you building on floodplains in Swindon?
There's planning permission gone out for Womburgh, Tadpole Lane, Blunsdon Way, and it's been flooded for donkey's years. Everybody locally knows it, but it's still been going ahead.
Do you have an explanation of why it's happening?
I have no idea. I mean, they keep saying about in the Mendips and everything else about the farmers not doing the drains and everything else, but I mean, you only need to go down the roads around here locally and you will see they're flooded, even though the farmers dig them out all the time.
Yeah. Well, let's not talk about... We talked about the floods last week. Let's talk about the building planning on floodplains. Roger Scruton, you're a countryman and follow country events. What's your view about the planning decisions?
Well, there are two enormous problems that we confront. One is that obviously the British weather, the English weather in particular, which has always been unpredictable and has suddenly this last year become much worse than normal. That's not something you can plan for. But secondly, our country is overpopulated, England in particular, and we have to build somewhere to accommodate the people. Without a long-term policy about population and demographics, there's going to be no answer to this. People are going to have to build on the territory adjacent to towns, and some of that territory is going to be in a floodplain. And I think it's not the planners that are responsible for the problems. They will have to do their best to avoid that, but they've still got to answer to the nation's need for new homes.
OK. Philip Hammond, you've just taken your boots off to come in here tonight, because you seem to have been everywhere over the last fortnight. In fact, I thought you'd given up being Secretary of State for Defence and become Secretary of State for Floods.
No, Secretary of State for Defence, and Defence is very glad that it's been able to play, I hope, a constructive role in trying to respond to the crisis. Okay. Look, the problem we've got, as Roger says, is that we're a low-lying, southern England is a low-lying bit of the country. 13% of England is floodplain, and unfortunately, the floodplains are often the places where economic activity is happening for historical reasons. Much of London is a floodplain. So I don't think it's practical to say no building at all in floodplains. Clearly, we must avoid building in the highest flood risk areas. And where we do allow any building in floodplains, we've got to make sure that that building is accompanied by proper investment in flood defences and flood protection and flood alleviation schemes, so that if you take a floodplain like the Thames Valley, my constituency, a significant part of which was flooded over the last 10 days, there are new developments that haven't flooded at all because they've been well constructed with proper defences. There are other relatively new developments that have gone under at the first sign of the Thames overtopping its banks. So I think we have to get the balance right. We can, I think, build some development in floodplains, but we have to do it properly and we mustn't scrimp.
You sit up there.
Well, every year we seem to be hearing about another year of floods. There was 2007, 2010 and now. Surely we need a long-term plan to deal with these floods, because they're coming more and more common.
We have one.
And what do you do?
We have one.
Well,
What's your long-term plan?
I want to hear.
What?
What are we going to do about it?
What are you going to do? What
we've done, I mean, for the first time, we've set out now a 5-year forward plan for flood defence investment, £2.3 billion already committed, and plus whatever else the next spending review throws up, so that the Environment Agency can start planning. We've invested...
We're going to stop flooding,
Well, look, actually, we're making great progress. Everybody's focused over the last couple of weeks, rightly, on the properties that have flooded, and for any person whose property floods, that is a tragedy. But we should also remember that 1.3 million homes in this country are protected by flood defences. In 2007, we had floods. We had 55,000 homes flooded. In 2013-14, this flooding event, we've had about 6,500 homes flooded, because we have, under both this government and the previous government, invested in flood defences. The situation is getting better.
The woman at the back there, the second row from there.
Going back to the first question on building on floodplains, I just wonder why we are allowing people to legislate greenfield sites when actually, due to the economic downturn, we've got any number of unused brownfield sites that are being left unused. Surely these sites that we already know are usable and are relatively safe for buildings, why aren't we developing these rather than building on sites that are used for agriculture and other enterprises?
Who wants to take that on? Jeanette, you want to take that? Yeah.
No, I think it's a good point, and it's a right point, that we don't use our brownfield sites sufficiently well or make our inner cities more attractive. There are plenty of places that we can think about imaginatively for housing. We don't always have to think about the obvious greenfield targets. And floodplains are a problem. It's no good saying, well, you know, it's getting wetter and 13% of England is floodplain. We know that. And with respect, Roger, I mean, James Lovelock started saying in the 1970s that the result of climate change for the United Kingdom will be that we will get wetter and wetter and wetter. That was in the mid-70s. James Lovelock stood up there and he said, this is what climate change will mean for the UK. And he's been proved absolutely right, and everybody laughed him to scorn. You know, climate change is real. Nobody's mentioned it yet, but it's real. We're in it. You know, there are things that we're going to have to do as a country and looking larger as for global action. Otherwise, you know, we're not going to have a planet to live on, never mind floodplains or brownfield sites. You know, we're going to destabilise so much of our fragile blue planet that we're going to cause real catastrophes.
But you've still got to build houses in Britain. What do you think, the woman there in black and white?
I think that we're talking an awful lot about expensive flood defence schemes, but why aren't we going back to the basics, the basic geography of maintaining floodplains and keeping river channels as they used to be? There were photographs in the press this week of river channels taken in the 60s, this wide, and this year, half the width. They just don't have the capacity. This is fundamental. I mean, this is O-level geography. Keep
Is it as simple as that?
Is
it as simple as that, Charles Kennedy? I'll come to you in a moment. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Jonathan. No, the lady's making a very serious point here, because whatever government's in power, there's going to be more pressure for housing, for all the very good reasons that were outlined earlier. And I haven't seen the figures in England lately, but the last time I was looking at them, they are astonishing. If you look at the numbers, the total numbers for England and Wales, these figures were, those categorised as homeless, and then you look at the number of empty properties that are not being utilised, particularly on old-fashioned high streets, above the shops. Now, go back in days, the shopkeeper lived above the premises and all the rest of it. That's gone. You've got all sorts of social problems that have come. The police will tell you you can have CCTV, you can have this, you can have that. The best security you can have in a township setup is actually having people living in the middle of the place. And you address a lot of social problems, from homelessness to disorder in the streets, but you also begin to cut into this relentless erosion, if you'll pardon the pun, erosion of natural land, which we're building and building and building on, and yet is finite, and we can't cope with the capacity that we've got.
OK. Thank you, Nigel. And from there. Yes.
That lady's point about managing the floodplains is absolutely valid. However, if government and local authorities are going to continue to authorise building on the floodplains, they should provide the funds to prevent flooding. In Germany, I think it was Hamburg. I think it's Hamburg. They built a complete business sector on a floodplain, and they put the fences in place, and it's never ever been flooded. So if we're going to still keep building on floodplains, we should be prepared to spend the money to stop the houses and other properties flooding.
That should pay, not the local authorities.
I wanted to come back to the point the gentleman in the checky shirt made about we've got to have a long-term plan for this. And certainly I think the government's climate change committee has said, you know, the investment in the flood defence is about £500,000 down on what it should be. But if it was in place, we would make sure that we wouldn't end up spending up to, I think, about £3 billion in terms of the kind of cost of failure. And this comes back to a point we've been talking about before, which is to shift our thinking to the longer term. I do agree with the initial, Philip, with your initial point, which is it doesn't make sense to people to build huge numbers of houses on areas that are really at risk, because then you'll have to spend even more on the defences. So we need a balance, and we also need to critically start waking up to the bigger, longer issue of climate change. We know the world is getting warmer, we know that's creating more moisture, and it means when stormy conditions happen, it makes the rainfall more intense. And that is the medium to longer term issue we've got to face up to. We can do a lot in this country, but we have to work with others. So it's the long term approach I think we really need.
I want to turn to it. Thank you very much. Turn to another question. This from Claire Evans.
Does the yobbery of MPs during Prime Minister's questions give the best impression of the political elite?
The yobbery. This was, of course, said by the Speaker, elected by the House of Commons, to speak his mind about them, and that's what he said. They behaved like yobs and upper-class toffs and all sorts of other things, and were giving themselves a bad name. All right. Have you got a bad name?
No, it doesn't give us a good name. I think Prime Minister's questions is... the behaviour there is unprofessional, it's childish, it is at times nasty. I think that we're at work. You know, this is our workplace. Where else? You know, you wouldn't tolerate that behaviour in a classroom, you know, let alone a boardroom of any effective kind of an organisation.
You never shout out, you never
so
go on and confess. Twice.
I have, if not shouted, loudly projected. And about two things I felt strongly about, but I didn't feel good about myself afterwards, because I thought if my constituents had seen me, let alone my mother, you know, my life wouldn't be worth living. So I think Prime Minister's questions needs to change. I think it can change. I think we can change the culture if our party leaders and party whips decide that's what they want to see happening. And I would, this is a personal view, not a party view, I think I would like to see real changes to PMQs. I think if we went back to 2 sessions a week, made one about perhaps a specific topic, so you could have much more in-depth questioning, or you made one more like a kind of select committee session where groups of MPs, small groups in rotation, could question the Prime Minister, you know, having a meaningful discussion rather than, you know, this is our window on the world. And if you, like me, believe in the power of politics and democracy potentially to change the world for good, and this is our window on the world, it is not a good advertisement.
Charles Kennedy, you've... You've been there longer than anybody else on this panel, and you know that 500,000 people in this country watch it, and people in the United States watch it, for the sort of political excitement of it. Do you think it should change?
The Americans love it, because they've got no equivalent whatsoever. Now, Obama's very fast on his feet, and he could cope with it, but imagine if George Bush had to do Prime Minister's question time. I mean, he would never have got a second term. So, you know, it has its advantages. There was a very distinguished parliamentary commentator of years ago called Norman Shrapnel, and he once wrote, too much silence is much more ominous than too much noise in a parliamentary democracy. Now, I'm not a fan of Prime Minister's questions. I used to have to ask 2 questions once a week for the 7 years or so that I was party leader, getting shouted at by both sides, both colleagues here. Well, perhaps not both colleagues here, but certainly their equivalents in days gone by. I don't think it's a good advert, but it isn't also a typical representation of Parliament at work. And I find, for example, as a consumer, political consumer, I like when the Prime Minister goes a couple of times a year in front of the committee for a couple of hours, chaired by all the select committee chairs. And you do get meaningful exchange. You don't get yaboo. So if you want a bit of entertainment, Prime Minister questions, that's your slot.
To entertain.
If you want,
our job isn't to entertain, though, is it?
Well, there's got to be an element of entertainment about politics. There is an element of showbiz about politics.
Well,
if you're to get through to people.
Simon Cowell, then, if you want to be entertaining.
No, I'm not saying you just want to be entertaining, but sometimes if you want to make a point that gets through to people, wit can be a very lethal weapon in politics.
You agree with that? The lady there, the scarf, the blue scarf one, yes.
I think the downside to this is particularly for women. I think that many women are turned off politics.
Yes.
They don't like the adversarial way that they're picked on and spoken to. And although you've been very brave about speaking out, I think shouting over men and taking part in that is very bad for women.
Do you think Margaret Thatcher didn't enjoy it then?
Well, I don't think she epitomises all women in politics. And that's all I can say.
All right, Jeanette,
I think you're right. If we could get more women into politics, the culture would change quite naturally. It just would. You know the difference. Even in the best situations, you go into a bar room full of guys, it's a very different atmosphere than if there are ladies present or you're in there and it's just women. Of course it is. We don't have enough women in politics. And we need to encourage women to get get more involved, and I hope that will happen. I mean, the Tories have got no commitment to getting women into politics, but Labour does seem to. You've dropped your all-women shortlists. And I'd like to see women just changing the culture naturally by our presence. Look, even in the judiciary, you know, there are only 18% of women who are QCs. There aren't yet 30% of women in the boardrooms. Women are still underrepresented everywhere in public life. So we need to change that, and then we'll see the world change without having to legislate.
All right. And the man up there on the left, you say?
Is part of the problem the...
Oh, I was going to go to the man behind you.
Sorry.
But, we'll start with him, and then we'll drop down. Yes. Yes, you go first.
OK, I was going to pick up the point that you say about all women shortlists. I don't think that's the way forward.
No, but you're a man, so you wouldn't.
No, because there are very, very good women in Parliament already, and they got there on their own merit, and that's the way it should be going forward.
It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. If you take that argument, you see, here's the problem. If you take that argument, what you're doing, you're making an idiopathic argument where you're saying, well, if women succeed, that means all women can succeed, and the fact that there aren't more women succeeding means that women are just not very good at succeeding. Or you can look at society and say maybe there are social issues here, which is why women are not yet represented properly according to the population statistics in those echelons of power. That's what I'm talking about.
Women very much have the ability, though, to break through those barriers.
So
it's only because of all-women shortlists. It's only because Labour had all-women shortlists that we actually got the big increase in number of women in Parliament. That was the.
But you're all making the assumption that women wouldn't shout, and that Roger Scruton, do you think women wouldn't shout and it would be completely different?
There is the assumption, absolutely, that somehow manners are going to be better. If women are...
No, it's not that, Roger.
Well, let him have his say.
Well, you are... This is what Liz was implying, at least. And, of course, on a panel like this, you're on your best behaviour, and you do seem, you know, to be a very acceptable voice for your sex. I don't know what you're going to be like when in that situation you're confronted with somebody who really opposes you and really hates things that you're saying and thinking. Won't you give your...
If you've knocked on on doors and campaigned, you will find people who tell you exactly what they think about you.
Right, yes, no, so I have done that. Yes, but nevertheless, isn't the problem not the yobbery of the members of Parliament, but the bad judgment of the people who vote for them? You know.
Controversial.
Does it actually matter? I mean, the Speaker goes on about this yobbery and things. It's half an hour once a week. And as everybody else says, that's not what goes on in the House of Commons.
It's the only thing that gets on the television. It's the only thing that gets really on television.
But that's the conundrum.
That's the problem.
That's the conundrum.
Because that's what people see.
That is the conundrum. Of course, there's very worthy work goes on in Parliament. Committees are televised, but people watch PMQs. And the conundrum for us is that we need to engage the public. In a democracy, we need the public to be interested in what's going on in Parliament.
But the public are women as well as men.
Well, hang on, we all believe that it would be great if the public watched our very dignified proceedings in committees, but they're interested in Prime Minister's questions. And Prime Minister's questions is a unique institution, pretty much in the world. Most politicians around the world that we talk to are terrified at the prospect of having to face anything like that. It gives a huge amount of accountability to a Prime Minister of any party who has no idea what the question is that he's going to be asked. I absolutely don't agree with Liz's idea about having sessions where it's defined, a certain subject is defined. The whole point about PMQs is that the Prime Minister has to demonstrate that he's across the whole of his brief. He understands all the issues.
And why can't he do it without doing what he does, which is insulting the Leader of the Opposition week after week after week? I mean...
and not being reciprocated.
No, and of course it's reciprocated. No, and vice versa. But you have to remember what Cameron said when he came in. He was fed up, he said, with Punch and Judy politics, the name-calling, backbiting, point-scoring, finger-pointing, and vowed to change the way we behave. And that was December 2005. That's 10 years ago.
And did you...
9 years ago. What's happened? Maybe you should have a word with your leader.
Well, I think we're all captured. I'm sure we all go into the chamber intending to be extremely well-behaved on a Wednesday at
You don't have to be. Do you feel forced by peer pressure?
But
that's not good, is it?
The mood of the chamber captures us.
All right.
Even you, Liz. I've seen
you know
you
I'm
getting
quiet
excited
in
on the front.
PMQs. It was only in health questions when I got irritated with Jeremy.
Right, the man in spectacles I was going to come to before, and then we'll go on to another question. Yes, sir.
Is part of the problem the very narrow field that politicians tend to be drawn from? There was something the other day released from the House of Commons that said 57, so around about just under 10% of current MPs had family connections who had been MPs in the past. That seems a massive skew. Is inbreeding and nepotism the problem?
OK, on which happy note, let's go on to another question. From Moira Brodie, please. Moira Brodie.
The OECD reports that our best maths pupils are lagging behind the poorest Chinese students. Should we adopt Chinese-style teaching to raise our standards?
Yes, this was the latest attack on British education, and in particular pointing out that in maths, China did unbelievably well and we did unbelievably badly. Jeanette Winterson.
Yes, you ought to try the little test online. It's really easy. I mean, if our children are so bad at maths, as bad as this test would suggest, because it's a very simple test, then yes, we're in trouble. The test that everybody had to do. Look, if I can get 90%, anybody can.
You've done it, have you?
Yeah, I did. So it's a problem. But, you know, what do we want our children to be? How do we want our children to learn? You know, we need to have teachers that we can respect as a society and that we can teach our children to respect. All the systems in the world won't make any difference unless we have teachers who are passionate, interested, excited in the classroom and can make children think, I want to learn this, you know, this is for me. It's no good just sitting there and having the rote learning, the drill learning. You know, you look at I've been to China, I don't know many of you have, and, you know, you go into some schools and you don't feel that they are particularly happy places to be. You know, you don't...
I don't want to stop you halfway, but the Education Minister went to China and said that they have a quote, a can-do attitude to maths, contrasting with our anti-maths culture, and unless we change our philosophy and get better at maths, we'll suffer economic decline. That was Liz Truss's words.
Well, we won't.
Just wrong.
No, I think
yes, I think it is.
Right.
I think it is wrong. Of course, we want children to be interested in all subjects, not just maths. But we can only do that through quality teaching. Now, at present, as far as I know, only 5% of teachers have maths degrees. So this is something that we need to change. A lot of teachers are having to teach maths when it's not particularly their main subject, their primary subject. So that's something that we have to alter. Of course, we do. But really, I want to get the excitement into the classroom, and that's about supporting teachers and supporting schools. It's not about going to look at systems and bring them back wholesale and force them here on our children. You know, we're not Chinese, we're very different. It's a different culture, a different culture, and we need to really respect those differences and not try and make our children be something they cannot be.
This is just being alarmist, really, you're saying, these comparisons.
I think it's alarmist, yeah.
OK. One back there. In the back row, yes.
Having worked in an international language school, particularly with Chinese students and having conversed with them, they have actually said that while they value the education, they don't like the manner in which it's taught. They have very long days, they have very little control over what they learn and which interests they follow, and actually many of them aspire to come here to actually widen their what they're allowed to study. And they view our summer schools and where they come here to learn English as a way to actually have a choice in what they learn and their education, which our education system does allow.
Do you think there's a danger of being complacent about this disparity on mathematics, or do you think it's an irrelevancy yourself?
Yes, we do need to raise standards. We know that, but then I think it's also, we need to interest people. It's not necessarily the, you know, the hardline, you will study this, sit down and study this for 2 hours. I think we need to interest people in the subject, rather than just sort of ram it down their throats.
Roger Scruton, what did you make of the report?
Well, I was not surprised by it, and I agree with Jeanette's basic thought that there are not enough qualified teachers in the field of mathematics in our country. That's not only true of schools, it's true of universities too. People just do not read mathematics. They don't go for the hard subjects like that anymore. And that is part of, not of an anti-mathematics culture, but a culture of indolence at the tertiary level. People go to university, many people, in order to relax for a few years. You know,
Roger, they're running up huge debts. Who's going to relax when they've got 50 grand that they owe as soon as they come out? That's not very relaxing, to come out of university and owe 50,000.
It's not a great debt when you consider the amount of pleasure that it represents. The fact is that...
Just let me get this straight. You really think that people are running up... They're paying 9,000 a year plus supporting themselves just to doss about and do easy subjects, and they're coming out with 50,000's worth of debt and thinking, well, that's worth it. I can't afford a house. I'll have to work till I'm 70. I've got no pension, but never mind.
It's not quite as bad as you're implying. Many of these students are actually from the wealthy middle classes who are not running up debts or passing those debts on to their parents. The fact is that when given the choice to, between reading for a degree in mathematics and reading for a degree in media studies or whatever, they will take the second
But you're
option.
a philosopher.
Right.
What's that got to do with it?
Well...
He's a philosopher.
He's a philosopher.
Well,
philosophy is a very hard subject.
Is that an easy subject or a hard subject?
Well, it depends. It depends, Roger, doesn't it?
He never had a drink and he never stayed out late. The woman at the very back there. Yes.
I just want to say that some of those statistics might mask other degrees that people have, such as engineering and physics, where you have a very, very high level of maths.
Yeah. The man in pink there.
I think we're all very good at making excuses. I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and if she comes out of school not well up to speed with mathematics, frankly, I think the school has failed her, and I think I failed her as a parent as well.
Okay. Philip Hammond.
Well, I'm not sure that importing a Chinese system wholesale would be the solution, and I would certainly not want to stamp out of our children the sort of questioning, creative approach that we value, and which I think the Chinese system very definitely doesn't value and actively discourages. But we should still be hearing an alarm bell ringing about not just maths, but engineering, sciences, because whether we like it or not, we are competing with countries like China, the emerging nations of Southeast Asia, and if we want our economy to prosper in the future, we want people to have the kind of good jobs, opportunities for work, abilities to feed their families, provide for their families, that we've all been talking about earlier on this evening. We have to make sure that the next generation is equipped with the skills that they will need. And we are beginning, I think, to make some progress. We're seeing more children taking the, quotes, hard subjects in schools, and more people looking to study the maths, science, engineering subjects at university. But I think we've got to do it in a British way, which combines the discipline of those subjects with the sort of creativity and the inquiring approach that makes us what we are.
And you clearly agree with him.
May I suggest that if Mr Gove stops moving the goalposts and getting Ofsted to change its ratings, teachers could teach!
Right. Liz Kendall.
I think we do need to be worried about where we are in terms of maths. Having those basic skills is vital. We do need to have more teachers who are properly trained in that, and Labour introduced something called Teach First, which was getting the best and the brightest graduates involved, and this government's continued it. But I want to come to the essence of how you really grasp kids' minds and brains and inspire them. And the best teachers that I've seen don't use a one-size-fits-all. They find out what is the thing that excites and motivates that child. They understand if we can show how maths fits into a job that's involved in design or technology or engineering, if you can bring in people from those professions to kids from the poorest backgrounds who's probably never met an engineer, and to say, if you do maths, you can have this kind of an exciting job. I saw a brilliant thing in doing this in a primary school in my constituency, Parks Primary, that was getting engineers into the kids who didn't have those aspirations because they'd never seen anyone with a job like that, and they suddenly realised that'll be good. That'll be why it's worth doing maths. And it was the teachers who understood that, child by child, and that's the passion we all need to inspire.
Okay. And you stay on the right-hand side there, yes.
But would Liz agree, then, that it would be an advantage to let engineers teach
without necessarily having to go forward for an extra degree before they can get into the classroom.
Well, do you think... I don't know, sorry, how old you are or whether you've been to college or university, have you?
Yeah, I've been to university.
And would you feel confident just to go straight in... Would you think it would be good just to go straight into a classroom without any proper follow-up to give you the teaching and skills? Do you think you'd be able to do that?
I think that professionals that have worked in an industry for a long period of time, have developed the incredible skills, should have the opportunity to get back into the classroom and really share their knowledge with students, the next generation. They're the most inspirational people that are around, and I think they should be allowed to get back into the classroom.
Charles Kennedy.
Well, hands up, I hated maths at school. I was hopeless at it. I loved English. I was quite good at that. And would you believe I ended up with a university degree which was 50% in English and 50% in moral philosophy, stimulated along the way by the Regis Professor at Glasgow University of those days, who's a colleague and well known to Roger, Professor Robin Downey, who introduced us to this intellectually stimulating gentleman that it's a privilege to be in the panel with tonight. Although I do recognise some of the descriptions, Roger, that you give about undergraduate life, I have to say. At least of 30 years ago.
That was the difference.
Slightly different today.
And what about China and maths?
China. Well...
just for a moment, reverting to the question.
Yeah. I think we're right, and I mean, sitting, as I have been involved at Glasgow University as rector over the last 6 years, sitting at the university court, so typical of all the universities, St Andrews will be the same, Oxford's the same, the internationalisation of education is going full guns ahead, and we've got to keep up with it as a country in terms of getting students in, but also not falling behind. And I think on the maths and the sciences, we've really got our work cut out to keep pace. But I don't think we can do it by grafting a different culture onto us. I just don't think that'll work.
Who replaced you as rector?
It was that chap Snowden, who is, you know...
Worthy successor, is that?
Oh, well, the students chose me twice, so they have impeccable taste when it comes to choosing a rector.
Roger.
I want to go back to what the young man at the back mentioned earlier about the need to get people into the schools who can teach, who have expertise in subjects which we're lacking. And I think that he was right to say that this requirement that they have a special extra teaching qualification is keeping those professionals out of the schools, keeping these engineers from coming back into the education system. So I was surprised, since you admired the whole Teach First initiative, which your party introduced, that you didn't see that as actually the way forward.
I do. Yeah. That's what I said.
Right. So, but now you want to introduce professional qualifications.
You don't want to... really, the whole point of that is that it enables people to enter the school without getting a qualification.
But there could be a fast track, couldn't there? We could design something like that. People who've been in industry could come forward, maybe have 3 months, just to know how to face the horrors in the classroom.
I'm going to take a couple more points. You, sir, over there, first of all, just briefly, if you would.
I think we shouldn't beat ourselves up so much.
Right.
You only used to watch the BAFTAs this week to see the world-leading technicians that this country's producing, transforming the film industry.
OK, and the woman over there.
It doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are in your subject, if you don't have the skills to impart that wisdom and teach correctly, it doesn't matter. You've got to have the teaching skills.
OK, yeah. Right, we've got to stop. There are a lot of you... I'm sorry, I know a lot of you are still waiting to get in, but our hour is up here, and so we better stop. We're going to be in Newport in Wales next week, and the week after that we're going to be in Barking in East London, so if you can come either to Newport or Barking, the way to get to us is to apply with the address on the website there, or call us at 0330 123 9988. As ever, if you're listening on Radio 5 Live, the debate goes on in Question Time, Extra Time, but from here it's my pleasure to thank our panel very much indeed, and all of you who came to take part in the programme in Swindon. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
Paul Newman relives his hotshot days as a pool hustler thanks to a young Tom Cruise. Our late film The Colour of Money, next on BBC One.